У нас же есть ядерная доктрина.
We have better weapons. We have the greatest submarine power.
The most awful weapons will be used.
На Западе считают, что
Putin uses the N-word.
Notre dissuasion nucléaire nous protège. Putin, your turn is coming.
This is the Doomsday Clock. The Doomsday Clock tells us how much time do we have before the nuclear holocaust happens. The idea was conceived by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, an organization founded by Albert Einstein, and, for example, in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Doomsday Clock was said to be at 7 minutes to midnight, where the midnight represents the apocalypse. And so, the closer the clock gets to midnight, and the higher is the risk of nuclear war. On January 28th of 2025, that number changed from 90 to 89 seconds.
We are going to die in 89 seconds.
On the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, on the Doomsday Clock page, it is written blindly continuing on the current path is a form of madness. The United States, China and Russia have the collective power to destroy civilization. These three countries have the prime responsibility to pull the world back from the brink, and they can do so if their leaders seriously commence good faith discussions about the global threats outlined here. Despite their profound disagreements, they should take that first step without delay. The world depends on immediate action. It is 89 seconds to midnight. That's great, actually. So, let's make a poll about it. So, do you think Russia, China and the United States will actually start to collaborate to achieve world peace? Or do you think that... So I decided to take matters into my own hands and build a time clock.
So this is basically it's basically a clock which every 89 seconds it resets the whole world by 89 seconds, and actually it's about to happen, guys, and done. So basically one cycle has passed, and so humanity is forever condemned, stuck into a time loop of my creation. And so that's a bit terrible, but it also means that we are fine. You know, we're fine. So I guess in a way you should thank me. You know. Well, sorry, say that again. Louder. Oh. You think I'm batshit crazy and I deserve to die and rot in hell? You think I'm batshit crazy and I deserve to die and rot in hell and nuclear war won't ever happen? Well, you know that actually not fearing nuclear war could be like one of the main causes of nuclear war. We'll get to that later, but you know, as of now, I will say I am pretty convinced that we really are doomed. You know, for example, just take a look at America.
The United States, in the next years, will produce more bombs and make the ones they already have better. This is written in the SIPRI 2024, the book of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Said institute regularly publishes SIPRI yearbooks every year, and in these writings you can read about how much money is spent in military matters each year, nuclear bombs' locations and countries' postures about them, and other info of the sort. The book opens with: over the past decade, successive editions of the SIPRI yearbook, of which this is the 55th, have charted the worsening international security environment. In most respects, 2023 was a continuation of previously identified trends: more severe armed conflicts, fewer conflict resolution opportunities, higher military spending, a broad arms control crisis, and, as global warming continued, the hottest year on record. And that's not all. Back to the United States, you can read about the American Sentinel program on the Air Force Global Strike Command site, which is a .mil, so you know it's legit. The Sentinel will modernize 400 missiles, 450 silos and more than 600 facilities across almost 40,000 square miles of US territory. We're not digging 150 new holes, Connor explained of the physical replacement process. We're gonna pull the old missiles out of the silos, figure out what state the silo is in, refurbish them and place the new missile in. The United States have a total of 5,044 nuclear weapons, of which more than 1,000 are old bombs which are going to be dismantled shortly. Of the other 3,708, 200 are tactical bombs and the other are all strategic. Do you know what that is? Tactical bombs are smaller warheads designed for military use, while strategic bombs are created to kill as many people as possible. Of the American arsenal, about 100 tactical bombs are currently located in Europe, in the military air bases of Aviano, Gedi, Buchel, Volkel, Incirlik and Kleinbrogel. All these seem to me good reason why it would be wiser to live in an endless time loop, rather than let reality happen with such a high risk. I mean, the United States of America currently, right now, have a plan, the O-Plan 801012, that details where they're gonna drop their bombs precisely in case of a nuclear attack. I mean, it's insane. Actually, the video is ending right now. But you can never be 100% sure of everything, can you? Maybe humanity has a chance. Ah, Kleinbrogel, what a beautiful place! Just look at the houses and the churches and the colorful playtime structures and all these graves for such a small place. This is a small city in the northern part of Belgium, and just a few steps away from there you can find the Kleinbrogel Air Base, which contains roughly 15 bombs. Now, legally you can't film it nor take photos of it, and this is also true for all the other American bases in Europe. However, differently from the other bases, in Kleinbrogel you can film the airplanes taking off. So thank you, Belgian military. Oh, that's so cool. Speaking of airplanes, why do all these bases have to be airports? All the others are as well. They're all air bases. Can't they be normal bases with silos on the ground and missiles inside them? Well, sometimes airplanes are just better. For example, with a silo, when you press the launch button, the missile is gone. You can't stop it anymore. With planes, however, you can contact the pilot and tell him to abort the mission even if he's flying over the target city. If he hasn't dropped the bomb yet, all is fine. It's also a very efficient way to scare your enemy and always keep him on his toes. This is called the fail-safe system, and something similar was actually used by the United States from 1958 to 1968. During Operation Chrome Dome, B-52 strategic bomber aircrafts armed with thermonuclear weapons remained on continuous airborne alert, flying routes that put them in positions to attack targets in the Soviet Union if they were ordered to do so. So, to be clear, they were literally constantly flying while carrying nuclear bombs, and sometimes they even got close to the enemy cities just to then return to their normal routes. Former president of the United Press International Frank H. Bartholomew talks about it in a dispatch distributed on April 7, 1958. Do you proceed to your target? Does your bombardier press the button and does the first nuclear bomb go down the chimney to start World War III? Not so. You are saved, you and many others, by a powerfully simple plan called fail-safe. Fail-safe simply instruct you to proceed towards your target for a fixed number of nautical miles, and then turn back if, for any reason, you do not at that point and at that moment receive coded orders to continue. This has actually happened many times. The striking force of the Strategic Air Command has been sped on its way by alerts created by meteoric flights registering on the radars, by interference from high-frequency transmitters, or by the appearance of foreign objects. So, let me ask you, is this really fail-safe? What if there's an error in communications? Or what if the pilot, which in a situation like this is very nervous, misinterprets a signal, or doesn't hear one, or feels suicidal that day? What if there's static sounds coming from an interference, but for a moment it sounds like
Drop the ball. Drop the ball. Drop the ball. Drop the.
Maybe you think that a situation like this would happen very rarely, and that is correct. Maybe it's a matter of 1 in a million chances. Is that safe enough when talking about nuclear war? I'm not here to give you an answer. Whenever you find yourself looking at the sky and you spot a shooting star, which is a meteor, open randomnumbergenerator.org and generate a random number from 1 to 1 million. This is fail-safe. So, are we as a race doing anything useful to prevent such a war? Are there any treaties ongoing or stuff like that? Well, short answer, there are a couple, but they're not having great results. Take the New START, for example. This is a treaty between the USA and Russia. This treaty allowed for both countries to conduct inspections on each other's territory and placed a cap on the number of deployed strategic nuclear bombs they can have. If you abide to this treaty, you can have a maximum of 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear weapons. And on September 2022, Russia had 1,549 of them. However, in February 2023, President Vladimir Putin announced Russia's intention to suspend its participation in the New START because of the war in Ukraine and because even if France and England are America's allies and they have nuclear bombs of their own, they aren't included in the treaty as of now. So that isn't of any help. So here's another treaty. The CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. As you can guess from the title, this treaty doesn't care about your deployed weapons, it just says that you cannot use your weapons to conduct nuclear tests like we did in the past. And if you look at the list of countries who signed this treaty, you can read names like America and Russia and Israel and many others, so that's great, right? If you just signed this treaty, you still aren't participating in it. To actually fully commit, you have to first sign it and then ratify it, which basically means you're signing it 2 times. First sign doesn't do anything. Second sign, ratification, you're in. And that is totally normal, right? It's a completely normal procedure. In fact, if you think about it, you can see how such a logic applies to our normal lives also. For example, don't you hate it when there's a 2-hour-long line at the restaurant and then you finally get to the counter, they give you a table and then you have to wait in the second line, the ratification line? My uncle has died, but in his will, he forgot to ratify his death, so nobody came to his funeral. So I jumped in the grave and beat him to death, and at that point, everybody came to the funeral, but I got arrested for murder. Luckily for me though, he forgot to ratify the arrest warrant, and so I was able to walk away as if nothing had happened, and that's why I'm still here, and even after all the stuff I've done, thinking about those people, I do not feel a single ounce of remorse. As you can imagine, countries like the USA, Russia and Israel have signed the CTBT treaty, but they still have to ratify it. So, one last treaty. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW for short. If you abide to this treaty, you cannot use nuclear weapons and you cannot even have them. To participate, you have to sign the treaty and then ratified, but lots of scientists are supporting this treaty. One of them, Francesco Vignarca, is an Italian peace activist and prominent advocate of this treaty, and he has written a book where he explains why this treaty is better than the other 2. As of January 22 of 2025, 73 states have ratified this treaty, which means that the TPNW has officially entered into force. And that means that nuclear weapons are now officially considered illegal. Because of that, many organizations are going to stop funding the production or acquisition of these weapons, one example being the ABP, one of the top 5 largest pension funds in the world, which just in 2016 held investments worth around $1 billion in nuclear weapons producers. Other than that though, no state possessing nuclear weapons has ratified this treaty yet, thus I still believe that living a time loop would be better than being at future's mercy. There are lots of ideas out there on how and when should we use our nuclear weapons. So to make it a bit easier to understand, I've tried making a simple ideological compass about it. I've tried making my compass as simple as possible, so on 2 of the sides I put war and no war, on the other 2 I put nuclear weapons and no nuclear weapons. If you don't know what a compass is, it's just a way to represent people's ideas on a diagram. For example, Francesco Vignarca, we've seen him before. He thinks that all nuclear weapons should be dismantled, and generally he stands for peace, with no exceptions. So he would be about here, no war, no nuclear weapons. Right in that corner of the compass there would also be other intellectuals like Bertrand Russell, who wrote Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare, and Linus Pauling, who wrote No More War. But what about the exact opposite? If you're here, you think that nuclear war is simply the next logical step to conventional war, a military resource not different than the others. For example, during the Korean War in the 50s, General Douglas MacArthur had a plan that consisted in, quote, bombing 40 to 50 Chinese cities at the border with Korea to create a belt of radioactive cobalt so that the Chinese soldiers wouldn't be able to pass through it and help the North Koreans. Which is a dumb plan, because do you think they don't know how to swim?
This dick in my ass is way too big.
On this corner you can also find Juan Posadas, creator of Posadism, a political ideology which says that nuclear war needs to happen, because then the survivors will be free from our capitalist society and will finally be able to achieve real communism. Posadists also believe that aliens who live in hyper-advanced communist societies will help us with this plan, and also that we should fuck dolphins. Honestly, I love penetrating them. What you just saw are the two most extremist views of this whole nuclear situation, and as with all extremisms, it is very easy to agree or disagree with them. So let's take a look at someone who's closer to the center. Introducing Herman Kahn. Okay, so I read Kahn's two most important works and he actually has some good points. Now, if you're interested in this whole topic, I highly recommend you read Herman Kahn and Francesco Vignarca's books back to back, or at the same time even. It's very fun because they talk about roughly the same points, but with very different opinions. It's like watching them argue at the same table. Here's what Kahn thinks about total nuclear disarmament. It has probably always been impractical to imagine a completely disarmed world, and the introduction of the thermonuclear bomb has added a special dimension to this impracticality. Given the large nuclear stockpiles in the Soviet Union, the United States and the British Isles, it would be child's play for one of these nations to hide completely hundreds of these bombs. Even if some caches were found, one could not be sure that these were not decoys to allay suspicions, and yet there would be a great loathness to cancel the agreement just because a few malcontents had conspired against the peace. The violator would then have an incredible advantage if the agreement ever broke down and the arms race started again. This surely means that even if all nations should one day agree to total nuclear disarmament, we must presume that there would be the hiding of some nuclear weapons or components as a hedge against the other side doing so. Now, this book was written in 1960, surely now it would be easier to look for hidden bombs in other countries, because satellites have gotten better and also because nuclear weapons often need maintenance. In fact, materials inside them, like plutonium, quickly decay into other stuff, and you need to constantly replace them with non-decayed plutonium, and that could raise suspicions, but still, Kahn is right, and no other source that I have ever read has countered this point yet. Somewhere in Scotland, there is a little city called Fastlane. And in this city, you can find the military base where the 4 British nuclear submarines are kept. Actually, 3 of them are kept here, and the 4th one is always on the move, somewhere along the British coastline, from the SIPRI. In a posture known as continuous at-sea deterrence, one British SSBN carrying approximately 40 warheads is on patrol at all times. The United Kingdom doesn't actually have any ground missiles. All of its atomic arsenal is at sea. The UK has stated that it remains deliberately ambiguous about precisely when, how and at what scale it would contemplate the use of nuclear weapons. Orders to launch these bombs can only be given by the British Prime Minister or a second person designated by the Prime Minister himself. But what if they both get killed in a nuclear strike? Who's in charge of those weapons then? Well, here's what would happen, reading from Francesco Vignarca's book. There is no equivalent of the nuclear briefcase in the United Kingdom. Instead, orders on how to employ the country's nuclear deterrent are entrusted to the so-called letters of last resort. These are 4 identical handwritten letters by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, addressed to the commanding officers of the 4 British ballistic missile submarines. In theory, only the British Prime Minister or a designed second person, chosen by the Prime Minister but not publicly identified, can give the order to launch a nuclear warhead. The letters of last resort are designed to provide instructions in the event that both are no longer alive or are out of contact and unable to issue orders. Each letter is placed in a safe aboard the submarines with instructions to open it only in the most extreme circumstances. It sets out a number of possible courses of action in response to different scenarios. The letters are then destroyed once the Prime Minister who wrote them leaves office, and they are replaced with new ones written by the incoming Prime Minister after being precisely briefed by the Chief of Defense Staff on the damage a Trident missile can cause. I quite enjoyed my time in Fastlane. You know? I had to swim to get there from Sweden, but I can't imagine this place gone. And right now I'm thinking about a professor, a man named Robert Cetino. He wrote some books on the Second World War, and he also gave a good number of lectures, which you can find on YouTube, and I remember in one of those, he talked about a personal theory of his called the black hole theory, which works like this. In short, when you are born, you haven't taken any direction in life yet, and so you possess complete free will. You can choose to become an astronaut or, I don't know, a fucking stamp collector, whatever, but the more you go on with life, and the more you get pulled in by this black hole, which is a metaphor for aging, I guess. And so you are forced to take certain directions, your options are limited, you lose some of that free will. For example, a 40-year-old lawyer who never studied chemistry will never be able to become a professional chemist. So you gradually lose your freedom until you die. That's the black hole. And I wonder if that applies to humanity as a whole as well. You know, that seems like the logical conclusion to a bloodthirsty, trigger-happy race that just gets stronger and stronger until it just annihilates itself because it's not capable of getting weaker. If this collective black hole theory was true, I would stop the time loop right now. You know, I'm not a materialist. I think there's no point in trying to preserve something which has to go or which is in part already gone. My problem lies in the scenario where the black hole theory is false. If nuclear war happened then, it would be one joke too many.
You know, I might still stop the time loop if I
at least had a guarantee that nuclear war was unlikely to happen. And some people have already thought of that. You know, there's a little thing called deterrence. Deterrence is the concept that if two countries both possess atomic weapons, they won't attack each other because both fear the potential counterattack of the other. This is a very watered down explanation of deterrence. In reality, lots of different theories exist. Some people believe that with just a set amount of weapons, let's say 10 bombs, you could still exercise deterrence on another nation with whatever number of bombs, even 10,000 or more. Because these weapons are now so destructive that you really do not need that many of them to be able to threaten world destruction. Other writers, like Henry Kissinger, Thomas Schelling and Herman Kahn, disagree with this position. This is because, taking the example from before, if the stronger nation attacks first, it could launch its weapons at its enemy weapons, destroying them and making him defenseless. What could the other nation do to prevent this? Well, it could adopt a launch-on warning or low posture, which means that as soon as you see the enemy missiles departing, you attack. But this is dangerous as well. It's a recipe for disaster because even with one single error, you'll be causing nuclear war. But even if you have the same number of weapons, deterrence is still uncertain because now you have to convince your adversary that if he attacks or does something which you consider over the edge, you will have the resolve to launch your weapons and you are not bluffing. And you know what the best way to convince him is? Well, to not bluff at all. From Thomas Schelling, Arms and Influence. If two climbers are tied together and one wants to intimidate the other by seeming about to fall over the edge, there has to be some uncertainty or anticipated irrationality or it won't work. If the brink is clearly marked and provides a firm footing, no loose pebbles underfoot and no gusts of wind to catch one off guard, if each climber is in full control of himself and never gets dizzy, neither can pose any risk to the other by approaching the brink. There is no danger in approaching it, and while either can deliberately jump off, he cannot credibly pretend that he is about to. Any attempt to intimidate or to deter the other climber depends on the threat of slipping or stumbling. With loose ground, gusty winds and a propensity towards dizziness, there is some danger when a climber approaches the edge. One can credibly threaten to fall off accidentally by standing near the brink. Without uncertainty, deterrent threats of war would be ineffective. And so, ironically, avoiding nuclear war will involve risking exactly that. Now, there is a very important thing we have to mention when talking about nuclear war. Chicken is a game which works like this. I get in my car, you get in your car, we start at opposite ends of the road and speed towards each other. The first person who changes direction is the chicken. I hope you can see the parallelism with modern politics. Two nations both threaten nuclear war, and the first who backs off is seen as having a lack of resolve. If the two cars collide, nuclear war happens. By reading how On Escalation by Herman Kahn describes the game, we can see how the uncertainty thing applies. Some people utilize interesting tactics in playing chicken. The skillful player may get into their car quite drunk, throwing whiskey bottles out the window to make it clear to everybody just how drunk he is. He wears very dark glasses so that it is obvious that he cannot see much, if anything, and as soon as the car reaches high speed, he takes the steering wheel and throws it out the window. If his opponent is watching, he has won. If his opponent isn't watching, he has a problem. Likewise if both players try this strategy. So, to recap, how do I see deterrence? Very in fact, that's the only say that you press
Hi! Welcome to the Good News Corner! Now, in his book, Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare, Bertrand Russell expressed a very real concern. Well, as his hope, the Moon and perhaps Mars and Venus can be utilized as launching sites, there will be a sudden increase in the devastation to be expected. And there is no conclusion possible in this march towards insane death, except to turn right round and march instead towards sanity and life. And dear Russell, if we aren't turning around right now with the Outer Space Treaty. Key provisions of the treaty include prohibiting nuclear weapons in space, limiting the use of the moon and of all the other celestial bodies to peaceful purposes, establishing that space shall be freely used and explored by all nations, and precluding any country from claiming sovereignty over any celestial body or piece of space. Although it forbids establishing bases and testing weapons and conducting military maneuvers on celestial bodies, the treaty still does not expressly ban all kinds of military activities in space. Like raping and plundering!
I love raping!
This treaty entered into force in 1967 and as of May 2025 it has 117 members, including all nations possessing nuclear weapons. And I mean, that's just a huge accomplishment for us as a race. I mean, just look at that beautiful sea of green. Except
So, to recap, how do I see deterrence? Very uncertain, in fact, that's the only way to make it work. Let's say that you, president of a nation, made a statement. I will launch my missiles the moment an enemy nation attacks me or one of my allies with its military. Well, now you've just told your enemies all the things they can do undisturbed without a nuclear response from you. They can threaten your allies, not invade them, or if they feel brave, invade them with their police force, not military. How can you solve this problem? Here's what France is currently doing. France considers all of its nuclear weapons to be strategic and to be reserved for the defense of French vital interests. Other than a statement in October 2022 that France's vital interests would not be at stake if there was a nuclear ballistic attack on Ukraine or in the region, France is deliberately ambiguous about the circumstances under which it would use its nuclear weapons. In January 2023, French Chief of Staff of Armed Forces, General Thierry Barkhard, stated that French deterrence does not revolve around the notion of threshold. The threshold being the point you declare will cause nuclear retaliation from your nation. For example, you could say, if you declare war to my allies, you've surpassed the threshold and I will throw my missiles at you. So, French deterrence does not revolve around the notion of threshold, because this would allow our adversaries to consciously maneuver around it and circumvent our deterrence from the bottom up. France reserves the right to issue a sole, one-time only nuclear warning, suggesting that it could use a nuclear weapon against a symbolic target as a signal to a potential adversary. So, deterrence can be outsmarted, exploited to one's favor. Take the game of chicken, for example. You would probably think that, similarly to most two-player games, it would take two players to play this game, like chess. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, in this case, you need two players not to play. Because if I approach you and I tell you, "Hey, let's play chicken," and you say, "No, I don't wanna play," you've just played. And lost. But how would a real nuclear war actually happen? A famous movie which depicts this scenario is Threads. In the story, nuclear war is caused by a conflict in the Middle East involving Iran. Watching this movie is a really great way to understand how a real nuclear war would realistically play out, but if you want an even more detailed account, you should read Nuclear War: A Scenario by Annie Jacobsen. Now, first of all, why would you trust her? Well, in the author's note, you can read: this scenario of what the moment after an inbound nuclear missile launch could look like is based on facts sourced from exclusive interviews with presidential advisors, cabinet members, nuclear weapons engineers, scientists, soldiers, airmen, special operators, secret service, emergency management experts, intelligence analysts, civil servants, and others who have worked on these macabre scenarios over decades. Because the plans for general nuclear war are among the most classified secrets held by the US government, this book, and the scenario it postulates, takes the reader up to the razor's edge of what can legally be known. The classified documents, obfuscated for decades, fill in the details with terrifying clarity. This really is an extremely trustworthy piece of information, and in it are exposed some pretty grim details of our situation. For example, the fact that United States presidents usually aren't informed about what nuclear weapons capabilities and consequences are, and yet they're the ones who decide when to use them. In the last part of the book, Annie Jacobsen talks about the aftermath of the war. Nuclear explosions will lift in the air millions of radioactive specks of dust, which will cover the sun for some time, depending on the number of weapons used. But it doesn't end here. In this scenario, in all but a small region of the southern hemisphere, including Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and parts of Paraguay, widespread famine grips the Earth. The conclusion drawn in 2022 by 10 scientists working on 4 continents in a paper for Nature Food is succinct. More than 5 billion could die from a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. Nuclear explosions and the ensuing firestorms inject mass amounts of nitrous oxides into the stratosphere. As a result, more than half the ozone layer is in ruin. A 2021 study on extreme ozone loss following nuclear war, conducted with computational support by the National Science Foundation, found that after a 15-year period the ozone would lose as much as 75% of its shielding power worldwide. Survivors must move underground, into the damp and the dark, into spaces infested with spiders and insects like sucking louse. Above ground, as the sunlight dawns, things are as vile as they are below. In this new spring sun, a great thawing begins. This includes the thawing out of millions of frozen corpses now rotting in the unfiltered sun. First there was cold and famine, now there is harsh sunlight, pathogens, and plague. Insects swarm. The warm weather after nuclear winter becomes a breeding ground for disease. A study by the United Nations Scientific Committee of the Effects of Atomic Radiation found that insects are far less sensitive to radiation than vertebrates, owing to their physiology and short life cycles. Hordes of winged and multi-legged bugs are everywhere and are multiplying. Many of these insects, natural predators, like birds, have mostly been killed off by the cold and the dark. The return of the sun's warming rays brings with it massive outbreaks and epidemics of insect-borne diseases like encephalitis, rabies, and typhus. What does Kahn think about this? Now, I could stay here for hours talking about his opinions on the fact that the isotope C14 would get dispersed in the ocean after a while and radiation wouldn't be so bad, and the $500 million program on what the American government should do to prepare to nuclear war, but I think ultimately you could all sum it up by a single quote at page 41. One might well ask, if a few bombs in the distant Pacific or Soviet Arctic will cause so much damage, would not a lot of bombs close in be totally catastrophic? And the answer depends on how one defines totally catastrophic. A catastrophe can be pretty catastrophic without being total.
You are the target. Our president has told us that even against the most powerful defense, an aggressor in possession of an effective number of atomic bombs could cause hideous damage. Today, in the age of hydrogen weapons,
your fallout room will protect you, but you will make it even safer by strengthening a small part of it. This part will be your inner refuge during the worst of the attack.
Hi, it's me again, and today we're going to test how useful these devices really are. And to test this, a 100 megaton nuclear bomb is going to be dropped a few meters away from this place, so let's get to work. First, we have to
Choose a room with the smallest amount of outside wall.
The center is more protected than the sides from both radiations and the shockwave. Second, we have to
cover windows with blinds or draperies.
Okay, I'm on it. Okay, let's keep going. Now, we have to
Put boxes of earth or sand on the stairs.
Now, I know that this may seem useless, but it's important to understand that in nuclear war, every little step matters.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it. Just as we are ready for many other dangers, fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings so you know what to do. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. It can burn whole buildings. We are ready for fire, since it may be used against us if someone is careless. And you have fire drills in your school. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire. And you have fire drills in your school, so you know what to do if someone is careless. And you have fire drills in your school. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire. And you have fire drills in your school, so you know what to do if someone is careless. Automobiles can be dangerous if someone is careless. They sometimes cause bad acts if someone is careless. We are ready if someone is careless. We have safety rules now if someone is careless. Automobiles can be dangerous if someone is careless. They sometimes cause bad acts if someone is careless. We are ready. If someone is careless, we must be ready for a new danger. The atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. It can burn whole buildings. The atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. It can burn whole buildings. The atomic bomb. If someone is careless. The atomic bomb. It can burn whole buildings. The atomic bomb. If someone is careless. The atomic bomb. Atomic bomb. Sedan was detonated at 10 a.m. July 6, 1962. This is a view taken from the top of a 1,500-foot tower. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. It can burn whole buildings. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Someone is careless. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. It can burn whole buildings. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. The atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. The atomic bomb.